Chapter 1, The Quiet Archive. The air in the archive was a still, heavy tapestry woven from the scent of leather, dust, and time. Aria sat hunched over a massive, brittle ledger, the lone kerosene lamp casting trembling gold light across the page. This silent corner was her fortress. Outside, the pack's life roared, the boisterous rumble of dominant wolves, the sharp, competitive laughter, the thick, reassuring smell of earth and pine. But here, Aria was safe, a silent observer hidden within history. Her whole life was an exercise in smallness, a conviction that if she remained unnoticed, she couldn't be hurt. "I just need 3 more months," she repeated internally, a prayer more than a thought. Her 21st birthday was her escape hatch. She dreamed of a quiet, anonymous life in the human world, free from the constant, gnawing awareness of being unchosen, a wolf without scent or status. She needed that resignation, that muted hope, because her survival depended on accepting her insignificant role. This belief was the foundation of her entire existence. The single electric bulb above the main aisle suddenly shuddered. It spat a violent burst of blue-white sparks, then died, plunging the outer hall into immediate, suffocating blackness. Aria gasped, the sound sharp in the sudden void, and the page she was examining fluttered to the floor like a wounded moth. Her heart began a frenzied, desperate drumming against her ribs. Outside, the wind howled, not a natural whistle, but a deep, resonant cry that seemed to shake the very granite of the mountain. The atmosphere thickened, carrying a raw, primal tang of ozone and profound disquiet. This was no typical tempest, it felt like a seismic shift. Aria's hands shook as she retrieved her matchbox. It took frantic effort to ignite the wick of the fallen candle. The fragile flame wrestled the gloom, carving her small, isolated silhouette out of the shadows. The storm outside intensified its barrage, rattling the ancient windowpanes with aggressive force. This disruption was too large, too charged with suppressed energy, to be coincidence. Something long dormant was demanding attention. This instability was dangerous. She abandoned the thought of transcribing the old treaty. The flickering shadows twisted the brittle script into mocking faces. Her need to retreat grew urgent. She bundled her sparse supplies, gathering her tools, her resignation, and her paralyzing fear of being trapped. She couldn't shake the feeling that her invisibility had just expired. The storm had done its job, it exposed her. She had to believe that this tremor was just the start of the end of her quiet life, not the end of her life itself. She fled her desk, driven by a growing, irrational certainty that the shadows were now reaching for her. Chapter 2, The Alpha's Restlessness. Kael stood unmoving in the Alpha's study, the light from the massive stone fireplace reflecting in the unyielding amber of his eyes. He was a portrait of rigid discipline. Every muscle beneath his leather tunic was taut, ready, a perpetual state of controlled tension. Although young, he bore the crushing weight of their territory's history. His focus on patrol reports and logistical planning was absolute. He required this meticulous control because he understood that the prophecy waited for any sign of weakness. He swore daily he would never fail his pack, a vow etched in the memory of the brother he'd lost. "The pack's stability is non-negotiable," he insisted to himself. However, an unprecedented turmoil was brewing within him. Ruin, his massive inner wolf, had been dormant for years, a reflection of Kael's own ironclad emotional suppression. But tonight, Ruin was a furious knot of energy, pacing and scraping against the confines of Kael's mind, emitting a low, agonizing hum that vibrated deep in his core. This sudden, violent need was utterly foreign, spiking his usual irritation with a raw, undeniable terror. What force had resurrected this terrifying hunger in the beast? Following the sudden power failure, Kael crushed the report in his fist. "I will not be manipulated," he whispered, battling the rising tide of internal pressure. Destiny had never brought him anything but suffering and loss, it was a curse. The prophecy foretold a bond that would either unite their fracturing pack or catalyze their utter destruction. Kael had dedicated his reign to ensuring that bond never formed. He built high walls, not just around his heart, but around every potential flaw in his rule. Yet, the emotional pressure intensified, a burning, magnetic tether pulling him southward toward the most neglected corner of the fortress, the Great Archive. It made no logical sense, and Kael's life was strictly governed by reason. But this pull was undeniable. The sudden resurgence of Ruin's raw power was intrinsically linked to that direction. He couldn't dismiss it as paranoia, not when his wolf was demanding immediate action. He couldn't trust this sensation because every deviation from his plan brought catastrophic consequences. He spent several agonizing minutes fighting the compulsion, his knuckles white against the desk's carved surface. He knew his reason was losing. He couldn't risk the pack's security by allowing Ruin to fully break his control. He stepped out, melting into the storm's sudden, deafening roar. "I am retrieving information, nothing more," he told his wolf, even as his steps ate up the distance toward the archive with frightening speed. His journey into the dark had started. The storm had created the cover, Ruin was supplying the motive. Chapter 3, Fate's Whisper. The tempest roared like a captured creature, making the ancient archive groan and shift around Aria. Her single candlebeam was a feeble shield against the vast, enveloping darkness. She didn't hear him enter over the wind's shriek, but her nostrils flared, drinking in a potent cocktail of metallic power and frozen air. It was a scent that commanded immediate, total surrender, the terrifying, musky clarity of alpha dominance. She whirled around just as a mountainous figure separated itself from the shadows. Kael. He stood impossibly still, an obsidian silhouette against the raging elements outside. He looked like fate itself, demanding an accounting. Aria, her breathing hitched, she swallowed the sudden rush of panic. "Stay small," she screamed silently, striving to blend into the blackness. She knew the Alpha's reputation, rigid, unyielding, dangerous. She wanted to vanish, but his gaze, two flares of predatory amber, pinned her down. His scent was suffocating, a declaration of intent that stole the air from her lungs. She couldn't move because the sheer force of his attention felt like a gravitational singularity. Kael, his internal battle was instantaneous and devastating. Ruin had not just acknowledged her presence, the wolf recognized her as essential, slamming against Kael's mental walls with a force that threatened to buckle his knees. Mate. The realization hit him like a physical blow. She was his destiny, the girl tied to the dreaded prophecy. He saw past the archival dust and plain clothes to the powerful, essential truth beneath. A devastating sense of responsibility, mixed with pure, forbidden desire, overwhelmed his rational mind. The deep, ingrained fear that drove his life suddenly felt flimsy. He longed to touch her, to consume the moment, despite the ruin it promised. The atmosphere was electric, the quiet library a pressure cooker of tension and storm noise. Aria involuntarily lifted her head, and the motion was the spark that ignited Kael's restraint. His eyes pulsed a fiery gold, primal and unbound. He took one deliberate, agonizing step into the light. A low, guttural word tore from the depth of his chest, a sound born of ancient instinct, Aria. It wasn't human speech, it was a resonant, territorial sound, a possessive claim made in the face of all his logic. Aria, the sound of her name, heavy with heat and ownership, shattered the last of her composure. It was a word that revoked her invisibility entirely. "Stay distant," his human mind commanded, "mine," his wolf demanded. Both characters' core goals had spectacularly failed in this single, terrifying moment. This was the catastrophic, inevitable meeting that changed everything. She dropped the candle in sheer panic, extinguishing the only light, and fled. She didn't look back, driven by a fear that had a surprising, metallic taste of exhilaration. Kael remained, immobilized by the shock of his own utterance. Aria stumbled into her small room, collapsing onto the cot. Her entire body throbbed, not just from the flight, but from the sudden, unfamiliar wildfire of heat surging beneath her skin. She had been seen, and the recognition felt less like dread and more like a terrifying ignition. This wolf, this moment, has just redefined my future. The clock struck midnight. The invisible threshold of her 21st birthday was crossed. With a final, faint internal snap, a powerful, unknown energy surged through her veins, settling deep in her heart. She was a different creature now. She drifted into a restless sleep, entirely unaware of the dramatic relocation that awaited her. She was about to wake up in the Alpha's personal space, in a way that defied all reason and custom. Chapter 4: The Alpha's Chamber. A blinding wave of confusion hit Aria before memory did. The first sensation was warmth, an overwhelming, thick heat that felt nothing like her cramped, cold attic room. The scent that flooded her senses was clean, musky, and devastatingly familiar: snow, burnt pine, and the overpowering, intimate musk of Kael. She opened her eyes to discover she was tangled in sheets of rich, dark linen, lying in a colossal bed. This wasn't just a bedroom, this was the Alpha's private chamber, a space she had only ever heard described in reverent whispers. Panic clawed at her throat. How did I get here? The memory of the archive, the storm, and Kael's possessive whisper rushed back. But the jump from her cot to this luxurious prison was terrifyingly blank. Her disorientation deepened when her fingers brushed against her own neck. There, just beneath her collarbone, was a faint, angry red mark, a slight burning sensation like a brand new scar. It wasn't a scratch, it was a bite. The primal shock of the realization was a silent scream in her mind. She was marked. Her old life, the life of quiet resignation, had evaporated. She scrambled out of the bed, her body trembling with a mixture of shame and disbelief. The room was breathtaking: dark stone walls, massive furs thrown over carved furniture, and high windows overlooking the Packlands, a king's domain. Unwanted was her identity, marked by the Alpha was an impossible, catastrophic shift. She ran to the nearest mirror, her reflection showing wild eyes and the undeniable symbol of forced claim glowing faintly on her skin. She had been chosen against her will, perhaps in her sleep, by the one wolf she needed to avoid. This violation felt like a death sentence, because the pack rules dictated the punishment for anyone, even a marked mate, who dared disturb the Alpha's control. The heavy, carved door swung inward without warning. Kael stood framed in the doorway, barefoot, shirtless, his muscular chest rising and falling in deep, ragged breaths. His amber eyes, usually so cold and controlled, were wide with a confusion that mirrored her own. He looked raw, stripped bare by the morning light. You. The word was rough, laced with disbelief. Aria's throat was dry. What happened? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Why am I here, Kael? He took an instinctive step back, his hand raking through his dark hair. He was struggling, visually battling an internal war. She watched Adam's apple bob as he swallowed hard. He seemed just as trapped as she was. The shock of the morning was a palpable weight in the room, threatening to crush them both. Chapter 5: The Wolf's Demand. The sight of Aria in his bed, tangled in his sheets with his fresh, possessive mark on her neck, hit Kael with the force of an avalanche. He was drowning in a wave of impossible reality. The primal, musk-heavy scent of their new, raw bond was everywhere, making his wolf, Ruin, surge with victorious, chest-shattering power. This was not possible, this was the ultimate failure of control. His mind raged, I did not do this. He had awakened moments ago with his wolf roaring in triumph and the scent of the new bond overwhelming his senses. He had rushed back to his chambers, knowing before he opened the door that she would be there. He remembered leaving her in the archives, fighting the overwhelming urge to pursue her. The memory of the intervening hours was a blur, a terrifying void that spoke of the wolf's complete, dominant control. Ruin was strong again, stronger than he'd been in years. The beast was practically humming with vitality, energized by Aria's proximity and the physical connection. But Kael was consumed by denial and pure, volatile fury. He fought Ruin, physically bracing himself against the doorframe to keep his distance from Aria. I reject this bond because it is the weapon of the prophecy. His goal was to regain control, to deny the undeniable connection, but his wolf's sudden, vibrant health was the proof he needed to fear. Get dressed, Kael commanded, his voice a low, painful rasp, trying to impose order on the chaos. We need to talk. Now. Aria looked wounded, her eyes wide with fear and betrayal. Her reaction intensified his own self-loathing. He saw the mark again, a vibrant sign of his failure etched on her vulnerable skin. The shame was a bitter bile in his throat. The tense standoff was violently interrupted. A clamor erupted outside the thick oak door, shouts, then the sharp, authoritative knock of the beta. Alpha. The council demands an audience. Now, sir. Rumors are spreading through the pack like wildfire. Kael cursed silently. The elders, the manipulative core of the council, would see this incident not as a mistake, but as a crisis, or worse, an opportunity. They would demand answers, and their interpretation would always be lethal. Ruin had not only brought her here but had exposed them both to immediate danger. The stakes had just escalated from personal tragedy to political upheaval. The hook was set, they were now trapped together by the pack's judgmental gaze. Chapter 6, Scrutiny and Sacrifice. Kael and Aria stood before the assembled council, the atmosphere in the great hall thick with judgment and cold suspicion. The elders sat on their raised dais, their expressions severe, their silence a weapon. The air was charged with hostile energy, amplified by the dozens of senior pack members whispering in the shadows. Aria felt utterly exposed, the new mark on her neck an accusatory finger pointing at her. The elder Tyrus, his face a web of deep lines and ancient cruelty, finally broke the silence. The girl trespassed, Alpha. She entered your private chamber. Such an act demands swift punishment, unless. He let the sentence hang, an unspoken threat filling the cavernous room. The punishment for such an offense, particularly for an unscented outsider, was banishment or worse. Aria felt the blood drain from her face. Her goal was survival, her emotion was paralyzing fear mixed with profound shame. Kael stepped forward, his body rigid, eclipsing Aria with his enormous frame. His objective was complex, protect her without accepting the finality of the bond. She did not trespass. I brought her to my wing for safety during the storm. He lied easily, his voice low and authoritative, but the strain around his eyes was visible only to Aria. He was trying to protect her at the cost of his own integrity. Tyrus smiled, a chilling, triumphant gesture. Then claim her, Alpha. Make the mark official. Accept her as Luna, or we must execute the law. The impossible choice was forced upon him. To claim her meant embracing the prophecy, to deny her meant abandoning her to death. Kael felt his resolve crumble, recognizing the tragic inevitability. They were locked together by scandal, by danger, and by the relentless, cruel hand of fate. Before Kael could speak the irreversible words, a frantic alarm shrieked through the hall. A beta burst in, breathless and terrified. Rogue attack. They've breached the outer wall, Alpha. A diversion. Chaos erupted. Kael reacted instantly, the Alpha duty overriding the personal crisis. He spun, his wolf finally free to pursue a physical enemy. Guard her, he roared, but as he turned toward the door, a rogue wolf, a massive, scarred brute, lunged directly for Aria, clearly targeting her. Kael didn't hesitate. He shifted in mid-air, a blinding storm of muscle and fur, tackling the rogue and shattering the momentum of the attack. His instinct was pure, unadulterated protection. Aria watched, stunned, realizing with crushing clarity, he would die for me already. He hadn't chosen her with words, but his actions had screamed commitment. The incident had sealed their fates together. Chapter 7, The Unseen Wolf. The morning after the attack was thick with the metallic tang of dried blood and nervous energy. Aria should have been recovering in the infirmary, but Kael had insisted she start training immediately. She stood in the damp, muddy clearing, wearing borrowed, ill-fitting gear, feeling the judgmental stares of the pack training squad like tiny needles. Her goal was simple, survival. She focused on the cold, hard reality of the wooden training stake in her grip, trying to ignore the humiliating weight of her newly acquired notoriety. It was better to be tired than to be invisible, she realized, finding a strange, fierce strength in her exhaustion. A beta was demonstrating a clumsy wrestling move. Aria wasn't paying attention to him, she was listening to a sound deeper than the surface noise, a sensation more internal than external. It felt like a frozen river thawing rapidly in her chest. She attempted a simple defensive block, but her movement was too swift, too unbalanced. Suddenly, the world inverted. A jolt, pure, electric, jolted her from the inside out. Her bones felt like they were dissolving and then violently reforming. A deep, agonizing ache radiated from the mark on her neck, spreading through her limbs. She gasped, dropping the stake. The air around her tasted sharp, like ozone and raw earth. She could smell the fear of the other trainees, the specific pine notes of Kael standing on the sidelines, and, finally, a third, unique scent, her own. It was faint, new, and undeniably wolf. The transformation was agonizing. Her body convulsed, struggling to contain the primal force unleashed by her 21st birthday and galvanized by Kael's mark. She wasn't just changing, she was exploding from the inside. She felt a horrifying surge of hope, realizing she wasn't a forgotten girl anymore, she was a potential source of power. This shock was tempered by raw fear. What if she couldn't control it? This awakening was a consequence of Kael's choice, and she had to master it, not for him, but for herself. She cried out, a sound that wasn't quite human, collapsing onto her hands and knees in the mud. The beta recoiled instantly, fear replacing instruction. He saw only a wild, uncontrolled shifter. Just as the panic threatened to swallow her, a massive shadow fell over her. "Hold still, mate," Kael commanded, his voice rough and laced with an unexpected tenderness. He crouched beside her, placing a powerful, steady hand on the small of her back. The physical contact was an electric shock that simultaneously stabilized her core and intensified the internal fire. He didn't step back, he stepped in. Chapter 8, The Forbidden Spark. Kael watched Aria's agonizing shift from the edge of the clearing, his own body tight with suppressed need. The beta was useless, paralyzed by the sheer, unbridled energy radiating from the girl. Kael couldn't stand back. The moment Aria dropped, convulsing as her true wolf fought its way to the surface, Kael's control broke. He rushed to her side because his instinct to protect her was now more powerful than his need to maintain distance. "Hold still, mate," he repeated, crouching close enough that his scent engulfed her, a primal blanket of safety. The word mate tasted of forbidden wine, intoxicating and dangerous. He saw the desperate fear in her eyes, the raw, beautiful potential in her thrashing limbs. He placed his hands on her waist, anchoring her, guiding the first shuddering attempt at control. His touch was pure agony and pure relief. The heat radiating from her skin was volcanic, scorching the remnants of his carefully constructed emotional barriers. He was supposed to teach her control, yet his own restraint was fraying with every shared breath. His hands tightened slightly, molding the curve of her waist, too intimate, too necessary. He wanted to pull her against his chest and absorb the wildness into himself. "Breathe with the change," he instructed, his voice low and vibrating with a desire that was wholly inappropriate. "Find the center. The wolf is not fear, she is strength." Aria looked up, her expression transitioning from pain to sharp-edged focus. Their eyes locked, amber meeting storm gray, and the forbidden spark that had ignited in the archive now exploded into a consuming heat. It was a silent conversation, heavy with all the things they were forbidden to feel. He saw the vulnerability she tried to conceal, and he wanted to destroy the world that had forced her to hide. "Keep distance," Kael mentally pleaded with himself, but his wolf was fully awake now, tasting the sweetness of the emerging Luna. Ruin, the once silent beast, pressed against his mind with a single, resonant word, a whisper of fierce, untamed possession that slammed into Kael's consciousness, mine. The feeling was terrifyingly addictive. He pulled his hands away, the separation a violent tearing of skin. He had intended to teach, he had only succeeded in deepening the emotional wound between them. Chapter 9, The Forgotten Prophecy. The spark of their shared moment was immediately extinguished by the scent of trouble. A sharp chemical smell, smoke and metallic blood, cut through the natural pack scents. They were still standing intimately close in the muddy clearing when the first attack wave hit. This was not a random skirmish, it was targeted. A group of rogue wolves, lean and scared, burst from the tree line, ignoring the outer patrols and heading straight for the training clearing. Their goal was terrifyingly clear: Aria. Aria, she reacted instinctively, the lesson Kael had just imparted kicking in. She was no longer paralyzed. She snatched a discarded practice sword and adopted a fighting stance, the fierce rush of her newly awakened wolf providing unprecedented clarity. Survive was her only directive. She saw the intense, murderous focus in the rogue's eyes. They weren't just seeking to hurt her, they were seeking to capture her. Kael, he became a blur of defensive power. His objective was immediate, total protection. He shifted instantly, a mountain of muscle and dark fur, placing himself between the rogues and Aria. The battle was brief but brutal, a frenetic dance of claws and snapping teeth. He fought with savage intensity, knowing that losing her now would not just break the prophecy, it would break him. He realized the profound terror of losing her outweighed even his lifelong fear of destiny. As the remaining rogues scattered, retreating into the dense forest, one brute lay twitching on the ground. Before Kael could administer the final blow, the rogue snarled, his eyes fixed on Aria. She is the key. The blood of the forgotten prophecy. She belongs to the prince. The rogue's voice was a ragged, victorious scream before Kael silenced him. A cold, paralyzing dread seized Aria. Forgotten prophecy. The rogue hadn't mentioned Kael's fate, he'd named hers. The stakes had not just risen, they had exploded into the stratosphere. Kael, reverting to human form, was breathing heavily, his body steaming in the cool air, his amber eyes fixed on her face, reflecting her own growing horror. Their bond was now explicitly tied to an ancient, external conflict. Their shared connection deepened dangerously because their very existence was now a battle line in an oncoming war. Chapter 10: The Sealed Truth. The rogue's final, chilling words, forgotten prophecy, had resonated in Aria's mind, a constant, low-frequency tremor beneath her waking thoughts. Her new internal directive was clear: she needed answers about her own past, not just Kael's fate. She couldn't fight a war she didn't understand. Under the guise of organizing new training schedules, she slipped back into the quiet sanctuary of the Great Archive. The air still held the sharp memory of Kael's presence, making her heart beat a nervous rhythm. She wasn't searching for ancient pack law this time. She was looking for personal history, driven by a renewed focus. Her mother, who had died mysteriously when Aria was an infant, was the key. Aria remembered her father had always kept a single, locked wooden box, which the elders had immediately confiscated after his death. If a physical relic was gone, information might remain in the vast, disorganized ledger stacks. Hours melted away, driven by frantic determination. She sought truth because silence had almost cost her life. Deep in a neglected section, among mundane records of property transfers, she found it, a small, sealed letter tucked inside a volume detailing pack lineage. The seal was her mother's unique crest, a serpent swallowing its own tail, a cryptic symbol her father had once called a sign of infinite power. Aria's hands trembled, curiosity warring violently with profound dread. She broke the brittle wax. The note was short, written in a swift, frantic hand. It didn't mention prophecy, but it spoke of the betrayal and warned Aria's father to guard the lineage scroll or the Alpha will misuse her truth. The warning was fragmented, terrifyingly vague, yet it hinted at a powerful, hidden bloodline and confirmed her mother's death was not an accident. This revelation gave her hope. She wasn't just an unwanted ghost, she was part of a contested legacy. She realized her perceived lack of worth was a carefully constructed deception. Just as the dreadful realization settled over her, a dark shadow eclipsed the light from the nearest window. The scent of snow and undeniable alpha power flooded the aisle. Kael. He was standing there, watching her, his presence utterly still, utterly demanding. He hadn't announced his approach, he had simply appeared. Her heart slammed against her ribs. He was not angry, but something much more dangerous, deeply, intensely concerned. "What are you hiding, Aria?" he asked, his voice low, heavy with suspicion. The hook was set. She now had a secret that directly implicated his power structure. Chapter 11: The Midpoint Shift. Kael's patience had fractured the moment he found Aria alone in the archive, huddled over the letter. His initial suspicion melted into a sharp, painful realization of their mirrored paths. He moved toward her, his wolf, Ruin, urging him to seize the letter, not to read the words, but to protect them. He knew she was uncovering secrets that would inevitably lead to more danger. He took the sealed truth from her, his fingers brushing her skin, a touch that sent a forbidden current of heat through his control. He unfolded the brittle paper. As he read the frantic scrawl, the lineage scroll, the Alpha will misuse her truth, his world tilted violently. The text wasn't a threat, it was a devastating confirmation. He rushed to the forbidden vault behind his office and retrieved the oldest, heaviest tome, bound in iron and silence. There, in the prophecy's deepest text, were the illustrations. An image of the serpent crest. And beneath it, the chilling text detailing the one mate the Alpha line must never claim, the descendant of the Guardians. Aria was not just his fated mate, she was the one whose powerful bloodline was prophesied to either bring unparalleled prosperity to the pack or be used by a rival Alpha to shatter the region entirely. She was the one he must sacrifice to save his people. His goal, keeping his emotional distance, crumbled into dust. The undeniable knowledge of the bond collided with the horrifying truth of the prohibition. He was struck by heartbreak, longing, and a terrifying fear because he knew his duty was to push her away, but his wolf's demands were absolute. Their connection was not just undeniable, it was a ticking weapon. He returned to the archive, finding her standing there, small but fiercely defiant. He could feel the connection between them, a thick, burning cord. He took a hesitant step, drawn by an uncontrollable, agonizing need to offer comfort, to apologize for their terrible fate. He lifted his hand, his gaze dropping to her mouth, his breath catching in his throat. He almost closed the space between them for a shattering kiss, a true, non-coerced acknowledgement of their love. Then, the horror of the prophecy, the memory of his dead brother, slammed into him. He couldn't doom his pack because of a single selfish moment. He pulled away violently, the abrupt separation causing him physical pain. He slammed the iron tome onto the table. "Don't ask me to explain," he grated out, leaving her drowning in confusion. The stakes were now explosive. Chapter 12, The Antagonist's Move. The agonizing tension created by Kael's abrupt retreat left Aria emotionally winded, but the quiet moment of personal crisis was violently shattered. An undeniable, acrid scent, burnt sulfur and a rank, arrogant wolf musk, invaded the pack grounds. The antagonist had arrived. A piercing, scornful voice boomed from the compound's center, amplified by shifter command. The rogue prince, known only as Valerius, had infiltrated the main gate. The message was delivered with theatrical cruelty: "Give me the girl, Kael, or watch your crown shatter into dust." The announcement was a calculated humiliation, targeting Kael's authority and Aria's life simultaneously. Aria, the threat felt tangible, cold, and immediate. Her inner wolf surged with protective fire. Her goal shifted from seeking truth to immediate action. She needed to understand why the prince was targeting her. The note about her powerful bloodline now made terrifying sense. She realized she was not just a mate, she was a strategic resource. Her initial fear gave way to a white-hot resolve. Kael, he felt the insult like a physical lash. Valerius was mocking him, capitalizing on the pack's lingering instability and Kael's unresolved relationship with Aria. His primary, consuming goal was to protect her, even if it meant sacrificing his crown and fracturing the pack's stability. He gripped the iron railing of the Alpha balcony, his body shaking with suppressed rage. He recognized the trap: giving her up meant sacrificing his heart, keeping her meant war. Their connection deepened perilously. As Kael stared out at the chaos, he turned and locked eyes with Aria. In that moment, the romantic tension, the denial, the fear, it all coalesced into a unified, fighting purpose. They were a singular unit against the outside threat. The prince's demand had inadvertently forged their alliance. The pack erupted into defensive chaos, preparing for the siege. Valerius, having delivered his psychological blow, melted back into the shadows. The confrontation had solidified the war footing. The ultimate hook was set. The rogue prince had not just declared war, he had infiltrated the perimeter. Their only escape was through each other. Chapter 13, The Alpha's Guard. The rogue prince's chilling declaration forced Kael's hand. The threat was immediate, and the pack's security depended entirely on protecting the leverage Valerius craved, Aria. Kael's logical, guarded mind was overruled by a primal, protective urge he could no longer suppress. He moved Aria out of her small room and installed her in the most heavily guarded section of the fortress, his own private wing. This decision was a profound betrayal of his lifelong oath to maintain emotional distance. He risked everything to keep her close, because he knew only his wolf's proximity could guarantee her safety from internal and external threats. He supervised the installation of the reinforced door personally, the scent of fresh metal and sealant mixing with the heady, comforting fragrance of Aria's presence. Every moment near her was agonizing, a tight wire of guilt threaded with fierce desire. Guilt because I am deliberately drawing the prophecy toward us, desire because she is the only thing that makes ruin silent. You do not belong here, Kael stated, leaning against the cold stone wall, his gaze piercing. It wasn't an accusation, it was a painful statement of fact about their forbidden circumstance. Aria looked back, her storm-gray eyes steady. I know where I belong, Alpha. But Valerius made his choice. Until he is gone, I will not be a liability. Her defiance, her stubborn refusal to be fragile, deepened the crack in his emotional armor. He admired her strength, the swiftness with which the unwanted girl had embraced the role of survivor. He hated himself for having placed the mark of ownership on her, trapping her. He approached her, the air thickening between them until it was heavy, suffocating. He lifted a hand, his thumb tracing the faint scar of the claim on her neck. It was a gesture of ownership, of apology, and of profound weakness. He leaned in, his intention clear. This was not a forced mark, this was the choice of a dying man. He moved his head, ready to close the tiny remaining distance for a true, devastating kiss, a moment that would confirm their bond was stronger than the prophecy. His breath hitched, tasting of her unique spice and raw, nascent power. He pulled back at the last, terrible instant, his entire body shaking with the violence of the restraint. The near kiss, far more potent than the initial forced mark, left them both breathless and ruined. Their emotional intimacy had just intensified exponentially. Chapter 14, The Family Frame. The intimacy of Kael's private wing, the shared silence, the charged atmosphere, the constant, powerful scent of him, was a dangerous distraction. Aria fought the magnetic pull of his presence by focusing fiercely on her own objective, clearing her father's name. Valerius's claim that Aria was key to a forgotten prophecy suggested her family was not traitorous, but important. She had to prove her family was framed because the truth was the only thing that could save Kael's crown. Using the few stolen minutes when Kael was away, she retraced her father's steps, piecing together fragments of old pack gossip and cross-referencing archives. Her mother's note about the betrayal was the compass. The betrayal had to link to the central trauma in Kael's life, the death of his younger brother, the original tragedy that had activated the prophecy. She discovered inconsistencies in the official death records. A witness affidavit that vanished. A timeline that didn't match known weather patterns. Then, she found the hidden ledger, kept by a now-deceased historian. The ledger revealed her father had discovered the true perpetrators of the Alpha brothers' death, the Elders. They had engineered the death to keep Kael susceptible to the prophecy, ensuring they retained control. They framed her father to eliminate the threat of his knowledge. The realization was a crushing blow of heartache and fury. Her father wasn't a traitor, he was a martyr. The injustice fueled a cold, sharp resolve in her soul. She looked at her reflection, no longer the invisible girl, but a woman with a powerful, dangerous truth. She had begun to trust her strength, realizing her destiny was to dismantle the deceit that plagued the pack, not just follow the Alpha's lead. I have to tell Kael. This truth changes everything. Just as she folded the brittle, incriminating page, she heard a sound, not Kael, not a guard, but a soft, calculated footfall from the outer hallway. The scent was masked, subtle, but distinctly pack-affiliated. Someone inside the Alpha's circle, someone she trusted implicitly, was standing outside the reinforced door, listening. The betrayal was happening right now. The discovery was instantly shadowed by a terrifying hook. The threat wasn't outside, it was waiting for the perfect moment to strike from within. Chapter 15, The Internal Betrayal. The sudden shift in the pack's dynamics was jarring. Aria, paralyzed by the knowledge that a traitor was within the inner sanctum, scrambled to hide the ledger. Before she could react, the door burst inward, not kicked down, but opened with a key card. It wasn't the rogue prince, it was the beta, Rylan, Kael's trusted second, his face twisted in a snarl of cold, calculating resentment. Aria, her heart plummeted. Rylan. The betrayal was agonizing because he had been the only one besides Kael who showed her any kindness. Her goal was pure survival and escape. She lunged for the window, but Rylan was too swift. He pinned her instantly, his grip tight, a cold, metallic tang of fear and hatred emanating from him. Kael, he returned moments later, responding to the silent alarm triggered by the door override, but he was seconds too late. He found the Alpha wing empty. The scent of Aria was fading fast, replaced by the sickening smell of Rylan's frantic, successful escape. Kael broke. The emotional, disciplined Alpha disappeared, replaced by the terrified, desperate wolf. His inner landscape shattered. The loss felt like a physical amputation. He let out a devastating, raw roar, a sound that shook the fortress and silenced the entire pack. He had failed the one person he desperately needed to protect. There was no going back. Rylan's betrayal had fractured his leadership and stolen his mate. Kael shifted, a mountain of dark fur, his wolf ruin now a conduit for pure, unadulterated rage and despair. He took off, tearing through the pack lands in a desperate, impossible pursuit. No turning back was the only thought driving him. Aria, meanwhile, was dragged through the underbrush by the traitor. Rylan delivered her to Valerius at a remote, pre-arranged location, a cave hidden deep in the mountain. Valerius, the rogue prince, smirked, looking directly at Aria's terrified face. "Welcome, little Luna," Valerius purred, a cruel satisfaction in his voice. "I suppose your Alpha didn't tell you the truth. Your blood, my dear, is why your father died. You are not just a guardian descendant, you are the true Alpha line. And with you, I take this pack." The hook was final. Aria's true bloodline was revealed, not as a support to Kael, but as a claim to the crown itself. The betrayal was total. Chapter 16, The Traitor's Confession. The cold, wet stone of the cave floor pressed against Aria's skin, a painful counterpoint to the terrifying heat of the rogue prince's gaze. Valerius, lean and arrogantly handsome, circled her slowly, enjoying the terror he provoked. She was chained, the heavy iron binding her wrists and suppressing the nascent power of her wolf. Her world had just collapsed, her protector was betrayed, and her lineage was revealed as the true prize. Her mind raced to process the trauma, seeking any leverage. "Your loyal Alpha, Kael, keeps secrets, little mate," Valerius sneered, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "He told you only the elders were bad, yes?" Aria stared at him, her grief and fury battling for dominance. Valerius, sensing her focus, stepped closer, his face hardening. He confirmed the agonizing truth she had uncovered. "Your father found out the elders engineered Kael's brother's death to keep the Alpha line weak and pliable." Valerius paused, letting the devastating fact sink in. But that was not all. The elders were protecting their biggest lie. "They killed the brother because he threatened to recognize your mother." Aria gasped, the revelation tearing through her defense mechanism. The elders hadn't just framed her father, they had orchestrated a profound, lasting tragedy to maintain their power. Her entire worldview dissolved into a horrific landscape of manipulation and death. Her personal trauma was interwoven with the pack's political rot. Valerius had forced her to see the depth of the elders' deceit, a truth that implicated Kael's entire regime. Her shock quickly transmuted into a scorching, white-hot fury. She wanted vengeance for her parents, for Kael's brother, and for the years of being made to feel invisible. Valerius, recognizing the shift from fear to determination, smiled predatorily. He pressed the advantage, demanding the ultimate rejection. Kael believes his destiny is broken, but it is not. It is simply mine now. Reject him fully, Aria. Choose the true alpha line, your line, and you can rule beside me. The rejection was the last thing Kael would survive. The physical pain of the chains was secondary to the emotional agony of this choice. The hook was set. Aria was forced to choose between breaking Kael's heart or accepting a murderous tyrant. Chapter 17, The Alpha's Despair. Kael tracked the traitor, Rylan, by scent, the cold, metallic trail of betrayal leading him deep into the jagged heart of the mountain. He arrived at the cave entrance too late. Aria was visible inside, chained, wounded, and standing beside the smug, victorious Valerius. The shock was a paralyzing, brutal blow. His failure was absolute. He had lost her to his enemy because of a snake he trusted. The despair was a physical entity, crushing the air from his lungs. Valerius stepped forward, holding a twisted length of silver chain. Kael. The prophecy is fulfilled. Your reign is over. Kael's goal was simple: save her. His emotion was a chaotic vortex of self-loathing and savage, protective rage. He shifted, attempting to burst past the entrance, but Valerius was ready. He threw the silver chain, which wrapped around Ruin's flank, burning the sensitive skin. The physical pain was secondary to the agony of watching Aria imprisoned. Ruin, the wolf who had found renewed strength only through Aria's proximity, began to wither. The moment Kael fully saw the mark of his claim on her neck, the mark that was now within reach of his enemy, the spiritual connection was compromised. Ruin's power faded, the strength draining from Kael's limbs. Without her, the wolf was dying again, regressing to the silent, lifeless state he'd maintained for years. The prophecy was proving itself right. The forbidden bond was leading to his destruction. Valerius watched Kael falter, relishing the visible pain. She is the key to my power, Alpha. Reject her, and I let your pack live. Keep her, and she dies, and your whole line dies with her. The cruelest choice was forced upon him. The prince demanded the one thing Kael could never give: rejection. Kael's life was built on control, but this final moment offered only two paths of ruin. He was paralyzed, his body trembling with weakness and the crushing weight of inevitable tragedy. He saw the cold resolve in Aria's eyes, the strength she was forcing herself to maintain for his sake. The hook, the prince had forced the choice, trapping Kael between his love and his duty. Chapter 18, The Final Choice. Valerius advanced, silver chain gleaming, ready to execute Aria. Kael watched, his wolf barely holding form, his mind screaming in paralyzed terror. He knew he couldn't fight. Ruin was dying, his strength bled out by the conflict and the physical distance from his mate. He had failed his duty, he had failed his control, he had failed his brother. But in this ultimate low point, the core emotional question, if fate broke us, can love still choose us, was answered. Kael finally realized that living without the weight of the prophecy, but also without Aria, was not living at all. He had spent his life resisting destiny, only to realize that his love for her was his destiny. Kael let out a ragged, defiant roar that was more human despair than wolf fury. He threw off the last vestige of his fear and his control. He launched himself forward, ignoring the silver, ignoring the danger, driven only by the terrifying, exquisite necessity of claiming her. He reached Aria, pulling her chained body against his chest, shielding her from Valerius. In a desperate, absolute act of commitment, Kael sank his teeth deep into the existing mark on her neck, completing the bond, not just as Alpha, but as a lover choosing death over rejection. The full mark was final, absolute, and it shattered the fragile equilibrium of his dying wolf. The impact of the completed bond was overwhelming. Aria felt the intense, burning heat of his final claim, a flood of protective power and absolute devotion. Simultaneously, Kael's body went slack. He stumbled backward, his eyes wide, his limbs heavy with sudden, crushing pain. He had protected her with his last breath, his greatest fear realized. He collapsed onto the cold, damp stone, his immense body still shielding hers. Kael's death was immediate and devastating, leaving Aria alone, chained, and utterly shattered. The loss was absolute, but the profound grief, the utter shattering of her new existence, ignited the hidden, dormant power of Aria's bloodline, the power that would break the chains and change the course of the war. Chapter 19, The Resurrected Power. The cold, unforgiving weight of Kael's lifeless body was the heaviest burden Aria had ever known. His silence was an endless, desolate echo in the cave, and the despair it generated threatened to consume her entirely. Valerius, distracted by the quick, cold triumph of Kael's collapse, was issuing orders to the traitor, Rylan. Aria's world had shrunk to the cold floor, the unmoving alpha, and the searing agony of loss. The choice he made was a desperate, sacrificial gift that she could not allow to be in vain. But the black tide of grief met an impossible, internal counterforce. Kael's final, absolute mark, the sacred bite that completed their bond, had done more than just claim her, it had detonated the hidden strength of her lineage. The simmering power that awakened on her birthday now erupted, a blinding, silver energy fueled by her need to defy this tragic ending. She couldn't breathe, yet a furious pulse hammered beneath her skin. This energy felt ancient, pure, and terrifyingly potent. It centered on the devastating point of impact, the mark on her neck where his life force had been expended. He chose us. The realization struck her with an electrifying force, clearing the haze of sorrow. She refused to accept his ultimate sacrifice as a finality. A devastating heat surged from her core, channeled down her arms and into the heavy silver chains locking her wrists. The metal instantly hissed, turning red-hot and brittle, then snapped with a sharp, echoing crack. Aria was suddenly, impossibly free. She rose above Kael's still form, her borrowed clothes smoking, her eyes blazing with a fierce, ethereal light. This was her apotheosis, not the unproven wolf, but the descendant of the Guardians, resurrected by a love that transcended death. Valerius, alerted by the sound of the chains breaking, finally registered the threat, his arrogance momentarily fracturing into shock. He saw a creature of incandescent resolve. Aria ignored his stunned face. Her focus was absolute, Kael. She knelt, placing her trembling, burned hands over the silent cavity of his heart. She pushed the terrifying, raw, silver-tinged power outward, channeling the life force directly into his body. She was saving him because love had to prove itself stronger than fate's breaking point. The restorative transfer was agonizing, utterly draining her reserves, but as the silver glow faded, Kael's immense chest gave a shuddering heave. He drew a sharp, rattling breath, a sound of life returning. Aria collapsed, spent and trembling, but her objective achieved. She was physically weak, but her will was now unbreakable. Chapter 20, The Unified Wolves. Kael clawed his way back from a terrifying, profound darkness. The first sense was a searing pain, but instantly overlaid with the concentrated, fiercely protective scent of Aria. He opened his eyes, saw her collapsed beside him, utterly drained but victorious. He knew, with an impossible certainty, that she had pulled him back from the void. Her defiance had literally resurrected him. He knew his lifetime of denial was over. His crippling fear was irrelevant. The prophecy, which foretold his ruin if he claimed her, was meaningless because the greatest ruin, death, had been averted by the bond itself. He lifted a heavy, still trembling hand and gently cupped the side of her face, his thumb tracing the powerful scar of their completed mark. "Never again," he whispered, his voice thick with devotion and a powerful, final acceptance. Ruin was no longer raging. The wolf was surging with a triumphant, unified power. The bond was fully and irreversibly established, secured by mutual sacrifice. Kael slowly rose, feeling the unprecedented, intoxicating strength of their wolves merging. They were stronger together, a single, formidable force forged in the crucible of his death and her resurrection. His objective was now immediate and furious: reclaim his territory and destroy the traitors. He looked at Aria, seeing not a fragile mate, but the true core of his renewed authority. He understood that the final confrontation was their sacred duty. He helped her rise, supporting her weight against his newly vital body. The intimacy was no longer a dangerous secret, it was their shared power source. Before facing Valerius, he needed to neutralize the internal poison. The truth Aria had uncovered about the Elders' conspiracy needed to be public, undeniable. He needed to cleanse the pack of its long-standing corruption. The internal betrayal must be addressed before the external enemy could be defeated. Chapter 21, The United Front. Kael and Aria emerged from the dark cave, scarred, defiant, and irrevocably bonded. The Loyalist forces, already desperate from the betrayal and the Alpha's apparent death, immediately rallied. Their survival was a visceral symbol, instantly dissolving any loyalty to the rogue prince. Their objective was unified: dismantle the internal corruption and unite the pack. Kael, leading Aria, returned to the fortress. He summoned the remaining Loyalists and the Elders, the conspirators now pale and uneasy. He stood before them, his posture not of a terrified ruler, but of a king redefined by honesty and vulnerability. Aria stepped forward, standing unwavering beside him. Their undeniable unity was a powerful, visible declaration of the new order. She held the fragile, incriminating ledger that detailed the Elders' conspiracy, the framing of her father and their role in Kael's brother's death. Her voice, usually hushed, now resonated with the strength of her lineage and her righteous fury. She confronted the Elders publicly, laying out the undeniable evidence of their manipulation. The Elders, stripped bare of their long-held secrets, crumbled under the weight of the truth. Their reign of deceit was finally over. The loyal wolves, witnessing the Alpha's full acceptance of his true mate and the exposure of the traitors, roared their allegiance. They stood united, no longer bound by ancient, fearful law, but by a powerful, clean commitment. Kael looked at Aria. She was the beautiful, dangerous fire that had saved his kingdom. The shared moment was immediately broken by a sharp, urgent sound, the deep, resonant horns of war echoing across the valley. Valerius, enraged by their escape and Kael's impossible resurrection, had launched his final, full-scale attack on the main pack grounds. The hook was set, the final, inevitable conflict was now upon them, forcing the united pair to face the external enemy forged by their own hidden history. Chapter 22, The Climax. The valley below the fortress was a chaotic, furious tableau of battle. Loyal pack forces collided violently with Valerius's invading rogues, the air thick with the acrid stench of smoke and aggressive shifting musk. This was the reckoning, the moment where destiny would either claim them or be shattered by their choice. Aria and Kael were an integrated force at the heart of the conflict. Their movements were impossibly synchronized, driven by the intense, burning current of their complete bond. Kael was a devastating blur of power, his massive form a shield and a weapon. Aria, swift and incandescent, countered every weakness, her silver-tinged energy a sharp, irresistible force. They were not two fighters, they were a singular, powerful answer to the prophecy. Kael, his anger cold and purposeful, sought out the few remaining Elders attempting one last, desperate effort to sow discord. He fought with savage intensity, fueled by the memory of his brother and the desperate commitment he had made to Aria. He delivered justice that was necessary, clean, and final. He fought to reclaim the honor that manipulation had stolen from him. Aria moved strategically, cutting through the chaos to confront the rogue prince, Valerius. Valerius met her with a sneer, his eyes blazing with furious arrogance. He lunged, attempting to dominate her, to claim her ancient bloodline by force. Aria met his attack, not with blind rage, but with the cool, focused resolve of self-choice. She was fighting for her right to define her own power, choose her alpha, and escape the historical burden. The battle reached its crescendo with a simultaneous, defining action. Kael delivered the final, crippling blow to the last defiant elder, ending the reign of internal corruption permanently. In that same instant, Aria released the full, devastating force of her inherited silver power, striking Valerius with an impossible intensity that shattered his will and drove him into irreversible submission. The combined impact of the unified alpha pair sent a palpable shockwave through the battlefield. They had broken the prophecy, not by obedience, but by the ferocious, chosen power of their love. The conflict was suddenly, wholly resolved. Chapter 23, Falling Action. A stunned, exhausted silence descended upon the valley, broken only by the whimpering of the defeated rogues and the deep, ragged breathing of the triumphant loyalists. The pack wolves, covered in mud and glory, slowly resumed their human forms, gazing upon their leaders with awe and newfound devotion. Kael shifted, the pain of his numerous wounds secondary to the overwhelming sensation of relief and success. He rushed to Aria, gathering her trembling, spent body into his embrace. Her power was depleted, leaving her pale but fiercely triumphant. The scent of their shared victory was the most intoxicating fragrance he had ever known. They were immediately escorted back to the healers. Kael refused to be separated from her, sitting steadfastly by her side, his hand wrapped fiercely around hers. The intense, fiery bond was no longer a dangerous spark but a steady, warm current, grounding them both. The aftermath was a period of necessary healing and immediate restructuring. The captured rogues and traitors were dealt with. The dead were honored with a solemn ceremony. The old, fragile world of fear and secrecy was decisively over. Aria looked at Kael, his face stripped bare of his former emotional armor, filled now with a profound, open devotion. She knew, with absolute certainty, that the broken road of fate had led them to a far stronger, more authentic beginning. Chapter 24, Resolution. Days later, the fortress hummed with the energy of reconstruction and renewal. The pack gathered in the newly repaired Great Hall, not for somber duty, but for a celebration of unity and rebirth. Kael stood before them, no longer the alpha ruled by the shadow of duty, but a leader defined by his open heart. He descended the steps, leaving the dais empty, and walked directly to Aria, who stood among the pack leaders. This final act was the culmination of his transformation. The powerful alpha knelt before his chosen mate and his people. Aria, he declared, his voice ringing with honest, unrestrained devotion. Fate broke us, but I chose us. I claim you as my mate, my Luna, and my equal before the Whispering Mountain Pack. The assembled wolves responded with a powerful, joyous roar of acceptance. Aria smiled, a luminous expression of belonging and rebirth. She placed her hands on his strong shoulders, pulling him up to stand beside her. She was powerful, desired, and finally, completely chosen, both by the Alpha and by herself. Final image, Kael and Aria stood together on the Alpha balcony, overlooking their pack territory. The evening light bathed the fortress in a warm, promising glow. They were no longer broken, no longer forbidden, but chosen, ready to lead a new pack defined by transparency and love. Epilogue. A quick time jump. Aria, her silver power subtly woven into her movements, commands the pack training, her instructions sharp and confident. Kael watches from a nearby ridge, his face softened by a quiet, abiding peace. His pervasive fear has been replaced by the absolute certainty of their shared strength. Later, as the full moon illuminates the valley, their wolves run together, massive, dark ruin and the swift, silver-streaked beauty of Aria's wolf. They run side by side, equal, bonded, and whole, their combined howl a powerful song of absolute love.